Hey guys, welcome everyone. I wanted to welcome you to today's briefing on the alert that came out this week from the White House. There was a cybersecurity announcement around urgent things that people should be doing today to protect their businesses. So I assembled a team of experts here to go over some of that list with you, and at the end we'll actually get a resource out that you can use to gather these tips and a whole bunch more. But right now, let me have the team that I brought together introduce themselves. Paul?
Hey, thanks, Bob, for having me. I'm Paul Mancuso with Vital Integrators in Lafayette, Louisiana. Definitely glad to be here and offer any advice that we can to help out the viewers.
Good morning. Thank you. Jim Matolo, Porzio Compliance Services. We are a wholly owned subsidiary of a law firm, Porzio Bromberg and Newman. We're located in various areas up and down the eastern seaboard, and I am currently in Florida today.
Nice. Brian?
Good morning. My name is Brian Gunther. I'm the president of Exceed Cybersecurity IT. We are located in Frederick, Maryland, and we serve the greater Washington, Baltimore area, and we help businesses stay protected from cyber attacks.
Good morning, everyone. Ron Trotto, TC Computer Consulting. We're in Torrington, Connecticut, and we are outsourced IT for small companies and also trying very hard to keep everyone safe from the cyber threats out there.
Hi, I'm Chris Burns from Techie Gurus. I'm located in Metro Detroit. We have customers all over the United States, and we offer cybersecurity solutions and also managed IT.
Cool. Thanks, guys. So the announcement this week actually said with urgency to try and implement a lot of these things. So if you hang around to the end, we'll get the checklist out. But one of the first things on this list was mandate use of multi-factor authentication. Ron, can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So multi-factor authentication, the reason it's probably on that list is it's probably one of the most effective things that small businesses can put into place immediately to cut a huge amount of risk right off their plate at the beginning. Most importantly, though, is if there's somewhere to start with two-factor authentication, it's going to be with email, and then probably move on to the line of business application. But really, anywhere that you can enable two-factor authentication, you're going to do that. And it's most companies have made that pretty easy to do. If you're in the Microsoft platform, it's fairly easy to do. If you need to reach out to someone to help you with that, make sure you do that right away. But I think that's one of the best things that they probably have on that list that's achievable immediately.
Yeah. So I was working.
Bob.
Go ahead, Paul.
I was just going to say, a lot of people forget their social media profiles, especially if you have a business profile. You definitely want to make sure you have two-factor on your Facebook and your LinkedIn and all that, because it's very difficult to try to recover from those getting hacked too. So a lot of people just don't realize that's now part of business environments.
And to add to a little bit to what Paul and Ron already shared with us is for those who of us on the call or in this meeting who are the viewers who are not technical, just so you know, the terms multi-factor and two-factor tend to be interchanged often. But essentially what that means is you have a username and a password, often your email address and the password, and then you make it texted or emailed another secure code. That is secondly the additional, what's called the additional factor. It's something that you know and something you have, and those together allow you to log in.
Cool. So,
and that's exactly it, Brian. Like that nails it, because it's pretty easy to probably for a threat actor to get someone's password these days. Either they can phish or they can do some social engineering. But if that threat actor is not going to get that second piece of information, that's what makes it so critical and so effective and so easy to implement.
So I had a call a couple of weeks ago, and two-factor authentication would have saved the clients from having a problem. So it's not just the business's access that's protected. It's the client risk, because this was a client that email got compromised because they didn't have two-factor. And one of the things people sometimes question, Ron, is what if I lose my phone?
Well, you're going to have to reestablish your two-factor authentication, but as part of our planning for our clients, we have contingency plans and controls put in place so that we can easily reset those things as the provider. But don't let that trip you up. Just get it done. Worry about that later. Because there's usually it's a manual process that you're going to have to go through, call someone, go through some bunch of hoops to make sure that you are who you are. And the other thing too, Bob, I want to mention, one of the things that we like about enabling two-factor on everything, and we've liked it for a long time, is it gives us a lot of visibility to attempts being made. You don't always have the visibility, but when we're seeing that there's attempts being made and two factors giving us that extra visibility into someone potentially trying to attack, that's also helpful as well. So it actually provides additional information for us providers, as well as the safety factor.
Okay. So the thing here is turn it on everywhere you can see it, everything that supports it, and then we move forward. Perfect.
Yeah, I'd like to add something too. Be careful with push multi-factor authentication, because a lot of times it's really convenient for the user, but we had a situation a couple weeks ago with a customer who their account got compromised because they just kept submitting correct credentials, and the user got annoyed and hit approve. So you want to be careful and train your users to be careful about that. Don't hit approve if it's something that you didn't just do. You can hit decline and you can come back to it.
Chris, can you explain what a push notification is for everyone? So
it'll pop up on your phone. So instead of having to put put a code in or copy the code from like a text message, it'll pop up on your phone saying, is this you? And you'll either say allow or deny, or approve or deny, depending on what application you're using. And if you hit approve, you can give somebody that has your password access in, and it could be 30 days, could be 90 days. It depends on that site or that service of how long they can have access to. So you got to be careful about that. That's something to train your users on.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the issue really is, friction, right? And user experience.
Yeah.
And where do we make security inconvenient enough that it provides protection, but not so inconvenient that they circumvent it?
Yep.
Yeah.
And so I love a password manager, but if you're going to use two-factor authentication on any application, you better use a password manager.
Absolutely. Cool. So that's number one. That was the first tip. The second tip out of that announcement was deploy modern security tools on computers that constantly look and mitigate threats. Chris, how would you go about looking at that?
So I think the last 2 years has kind of shown us that the office isn't really the office anymore. And we need to be able to collect information from devices and applications and things like that everywhere. So as you look at this, you have to think of it from two different perspectives. You have to look at it from what the endpoint is, so a phone, a tablet, a laptop, a desktop, and also maybe like their internet connection. Because if you have a firewall and you're trying to, if you're in the office and you're behind the firewall, sure, you can lock it down. But as you go to the office, how do you know that their internet is safe? You don't. So we have to look at two different types of solutions for this. One would be SASE, where you're gonna, and what that is that's a secure access service edge. That's software that's going to be like a firewall, but it's going to be running all the times on the devices that are accessing your applications. And that way somebody can go to their house and be safe. They can go to a coffee shop and be safe, and we can control that access. And as you look at that, you got to go then down to the endpoint, and you got to say, okay, how do we protect this? And there's,
so Chris.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt your flow. Please keep going. I just had a comment.
Oh, sure. One of the things that we got to, and then once we move down the endpoint, we have to say, okay, antivirus used to be great. Signature-based antivirus, 10 years ago, great. And then we started moving into next-gen antivirus, which moved on to other things like fileless. So if somebody is attacking you in memory or there's some behavioral things tied into it, that's great. But that's not the end-all be-all anymore. We have to move on to things like EDR, endpoint detection response, where we can do active threat hunting, where we can actually so if your antivirus fails, we can move on to where we can be recording what's happening and be able to feed that back into a system and actually do threat hunting throughout the entire network. Because antivirus, one thing it can do, if it stops something from running, great, but if it doesn't, what can happen is somebody can go from computer to computer, laterally move throughout your entire network, and you're not going to know about it unless you can take all that information and be able to compile that. And when they're talking about modern security tools, that's what they're talking about. Understanding where the threats are and being able to have defense in depth for your entire network and have things in place where we can actually detect threats and try to limit the blast radius as much as possible.
Yeah, thanks. So Ron, Chris talked about a whole bunch of stuff there about monitoring and the threat and finding these threats. Is this something we can just buy off the shelf?
No, unfortunately, there is no Norton antivirus or anything like that available now. It's actually hard for us as service providers to develop, maintain, and manicure that security stack. So this is something that you're probably going to have to seek some professional help for to get implemented correctly.
Cool. So this is not a $49 package I can go buy at Costco and put on my computer?
No, wouldn't that be nice though? No.
Yeah, I think they probably should change it from modern security tools to a modern security system, because this is a system. It isn't about tools. It needs to be a holistic approach to your entire network, to your entire infrastructure. It's not just about a tool anymore.
Oh, and Chris, you had started off saying how like the last 2 years has kind of changed where the office isn't the office anymore. And really,
yeah,
we used to be able to secure the office network and be relatively, you can do MAC address filtering and things like that to where only known devices get on the network. And now it's just everybody's working from wherever. You actually have to go down to the endpoint level and monitor those devices with the next generation tools that are out there.
Yeah, and take it one step further. Also base it on identity. So when you put something out there like SASE, you can make it identity based as well. So not only do they have to have the software on their device, they also have to be able to authenticate. So you're making it very difficult for somebody to actually penetrate that without being on that device, having physical access to that device, which is, for the most part, physical access that's can be pretty targeted to get into. I mean, obviously, if somebody wants to get into it, they can, but once you start leveraging that, and you can even lock down your entire network to say, hey, unless you're in HR, you can't even get to this server that runs our HR application, or you can't even get to this software as a service application that we run in the cloud unless you have our tools on there and you're part of this group and you can authenticate as this user to even get into there. So this is the things that we have to think about just as businesses. It doesn't even matter what size you are. This is the level that we have to get to.
So Chris, this sounds like, it's really applies, a lot of what you're talking about really applies to with all these people working at home and everything,
Yeah.
How can we protect them ultimately?
Ultimately, owning the device makes it easier because you can work with the provider and put your tools on there. If you don't own the device, it's a little more difficult, but there are things outside of that you can do.
So, we run a lot of people. I've run into a lot of people. Somebody the other day calls me up and says, I'm using an online system, but I'm going to let my employees use their home computers. I talk to them and it's like, listen, you can't control what's on those computers. So how do you know that they're not infected already? So that's a really, really good tip.
Yeah, Microsoft allows you to do mobile application management or managed application management. So you can actually manage like what applications can access data on like SharePoint and OneDrive, but you have to be able to deploy that. And then that's where home users would be protected, but that's only the Microsoft piece. That doesn't count when you have 5 other SaaS applications that you're running. Most of them don't have those tools built in. So now you're still relying on them to make sure that they're doing the right things.
Thanks. Let's move on to the next tip we had here. Oops, that's not it. There we go. So Paul, the next tip was actually to check with cybersecurity professionals to make sure your systems are patched, protected against all known vulnerabilities, and change passwords across networks so that previously stolen credentials aren't found. How do we make sure the systems are patched? I know we can hit the button, but
Well, I think the precursor to that is also we're trying to manage and make things as hard to get into as possible for the attacker, right? Also, while not hindering productivity to our end users. But the issue a lot of times that comes in is you just don't know what those vulnerabilities are as the end user, right? So you really need to have somebody that's managing those updates at a corporate level. If you're a business, if you're a home user, you can run the updates. But people think a lot of times that the updates are their operating system. A lot of times they don't think about the other vulnerabilities, such as is Adobe up to date, is Java up to date, or these plugins that you use up to date, or even Office 365, does that have the latest patches? There's always things that are out there that people are going to exploit, bugs in software and things like that. So, and I think part of us as service providers is helping to manage that for our customers. And it's difficult to, nobody can guarantee you're not going to get hacked, right? I mean, we all know that. But it's having the systems in place to make sure you're able to recover from it. Now, Bob, I think you had actually shared this. We're seeing a big shift with insurance companies right now. And I think they had actually in the policy saying that, you had to patch within 45 days of a known vulnerability or something along those lines. So that's something that we're even as, like I said, as service providers, we're having to keep up with not only the systems that are out there, but all these regulations that are coming down from the insurance companies to make sure that they are getting done. So you may, as a business owner, have cybersecurity insurance, but is that policy going to pay out if you didn't patch your systems?
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, that wasn't in an insurance application, an insurance policy that I saw yesterday, that they had to be patched within 45 days, and it's not. It's 45 days of the security release, but that actually brings up a really good point. You brought up a really good point about it's not just Windows. So that Windows update that we see, that updates Windows, but it doesn't update everything else. And so you guys really.
Well, and even, a lot of people that I deal with, we deal with a lot of churches, they use Macs. And the common misconception is Macs can't get viruses and they've been safer. And we're actually seeing some of those exploits be, just as vulnerable, and having those third-party programs patched and all that stuff is very important in any operating system, not just Windows.
Yeah, well, I was on another security call last week, and there was somebody actively, somebody came in and said, "Oh, we're going to run Chromebooks because they don't get viruses." Well, Chromebooks will have plugins. The plugins call home, and they're insecure. They're probably more insecure because we don't have the management tools around those devices. So it's kind of a false sense of security, like you said, between Macs and Chromebooks. So
absolutely.
We're missing a big piece here too. It's not just about the Windows and Mac and desktops. What about your routers, your switches, your firewalls, things like that maybe you could turn on some automatic updates for, but some of them require manual updates. Right now, if you look out there, MikroTik routers are being affected by TrickBot, and there's hundreds of thousands of these that are being used inside of networks that, if you don't know that they're there, they could be used to expose your entire network too. So we got to stop thinking just from an endpoint perspective and start really thinking about everything. And what happens if somebody brings in an IoT device, like, I don't know, they want to bring in a Raspberry Pi or something that's running some special like emulator, they want to play some Nintendo games or something like that, and they plug it in, and now that's opened up a hole in your network. So these are the things that we have to understand that are there, and we have to make sure that we're addressing those too.
And it's really everything that's connected to the network. That now there's so many devices that are utilizing that. I mean, think about even home use, Ring doorbells, Nest, thermostats, all these things that make our lives easier. But is the firmware on those devices up to date? Is there security vulnerabilities there that they can get into your network through backdoors of that, or DVRs or things like that? So you got to think of everything that connects to your network, not just the computers. So that's a very good point too.
Yeah. Hey, Jim, why one of the things that we talked about a few minutes ago was some password managers and passwords. So I saw a post this week in one of our groups that there was a vulnerability that was announced 3 years ago for gas stations for their point of sale system that also runs the gas pumps. The password's admin. You get on the public Wi-Fi and get it. So can you tell us a little bit about passwords?
Yeah, I mean, so where my focus is throughout my career and with the U.S. government and afterward, it has been on cyber fraud, right? And if there's anything out there that can't be compromised, it will be compromised. Gas stations, gas pumps, I mean, that was years ago, right? That was something that just kind of happened. But, is it an IoT device? Well, it's definitely a payment system, right? So I think these are the things that we see is, these admin passwords and things that just haven't been thought about as collecting data, which they do, and how easily they can be compromised in a way that really is significant. And we've seen fits and starts of different types of fraud that pops up over and over again. And then there's some sort of a fix, right? If folks weren't taking the gas pumps apart or using, cards or what have you. So I think these are certainly issues that still come to mind for us and for businesses. I think, back to what Paul was saying about the password issue. Oftentimes we'll go into a business and they'll have had an issue, maybe an internal investigation, some IP or a fraud matter. And I'll ask them for, how do they manage their passwords? And I'll get a PDF with all the passwords on there. You guys are laughing because you've seen this before, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, this is the kind of stuff you see and you're like, oh my goodness. And then they have the date when the password was changed. And they're like, who has access to this and who has access to the systems? And that's the other issue is that everybody has access to everything. And I know that it's daunting sometimes for IT professionals to get in there and set these parameters, right? And segment systems and come up with, these rule-based or, access-based type of authority authentication. But really, this is where the rubber meets the road. And this is where a lot of the fraud that we see happens. Because it's too hard. They just say it's too hard to do.
Yeah.
I can add on to that. So we will take, let's just say we'll extract passwords from a network and we try to crack them. We have a 70% success rate right now across our customers and prospects that we've looked at, where we can pull their domain passwords that they use internally and we can crack 70% of them within an hour. It's not hard. And now in a connected world, you're starting to sync that password up to Microsoft, right? Well, guess what? You just have now synced that hash up there. So now somebody can log into Microsoft 365 with that. Well, guess what? They can still log into your computer with that. So you get somebody click on a phishing link, they download something. It's a simple password. And if we can crack 70% of their passwords, guess what? Somebody out there that wants to do something bad, they're going to do the same thing. And we just ran a vulnerability assessment for somebody, and their main domain admin password hadn't been changed in 15 years, and it was 9 characters long.
Yeah, this is something we see this all the time, and I think back to again, something Paul said. It's all your information that you put out there about yourself, and you become you're a target, right? The individual in an organization is the target. And if I'm putting information about myself, my family, where I live on my website, and then I'm on LinkedIn and then I do these out of office replies, I'm not going to be back in the office. I mean, we know how these types of things can be leveraged by threat actors for business email compromise, right? Which continues to be an ongoing issue. Bob was saying it's the client whose email was hacked because they don't have two-factor authentication on their Gmail account or something. Right. And someone's compromised their email and they've redirected all their responses to trash. And now they're contacting an accounting firm or a law firm and they're saying, hey, look, send money to my new wire instructions. And this is the type of stuff that's high impact, right? And it's very focused. But to what you all are saying, people are, they understand. The threat actors understand this. And we're just giving away this information and putting it out there. So between the technology and the training of users, we got to figure out a way to train the users, but also put some controls in place where, giving away your username and password, or clicking on a link isn't going to have people, isn't going to threat actors, with entire access to your system and just kind of run off and have access to everything.
Well, speaking of clicking on links, I actually just dropped in the bottom of the video the link for the tip sheet that we put together, which is 15 ways that you can protect yourself today. You don't need an IT guy to do everything, so there are some things that you can do today in there. And jumping back into the checklist, Brian, can you talk about some of the backup solutions and why we need them offline?
Yeah, sure, Bob. It's a great question, and I'll sort of start off with a common misconception. A lot of business owners and business executives and founders seem to believe that because they have quote unquote backup, that they are fully protected and will never have a problem. We'll start off with kind of unraveling that and peeling the onion back a little bit. Some of the challenges are backups can take a variety of shapes and forms. They could be old school, really old school tape backup. They could be backing up to a hard drive. They could be backing up to other devices, perhaps a flash drive or a removable drive. The challenge with that, I think we would all agree here as experts on this call, is that all of those have failure points. And those backups may have stopped running many months ago, maybe a couple of years ago. Who's checking the backups? Who's really identifying whether those backups are actually working, and most importantly, whether that data is proper and can be restored, because that's really what matters when the rubber meets the road, if there's a problem as far as data loss goes. So let's talk a little bit about where business owners should really be today. And that's a multi-pronged approach to backing up information. One of those sets of information may perhaps be at your office, at your site. Maybe it's external hard drive. Maybe it's in a backup, what's called a backup appliance. There are various vendors who sell these. But there should be a secondary or maybe even a tertiary backup set that is what we refer to as air-gapped. That backup set should always live far outside of the reach of prying eyes and ill intent. And that information, that air-gapped backup, should be there and available, again, off-site somewhere, just to be clear, not linked to your network in any specific way, and should be there if things really get bad.
Cool. Thanks, Brian. So that takes care of, you said backing up the stuff that's on the network. But so I've got my email on Office 365 like a lot of other people. So Microsoft takes care of that for me, right?
Oh, well, that's the belief. However, that's unfortunately not really how it works. Microsoft is, as a Microsoft 365 customer, whether it's Google Workspaces or Gmail for corporations, they have access. The data is distributed and technically speaking could be considered backed up, but that's not actually true. And if you read the terms of service, they state explicitly that they're not a backup platform, okay? And so what we advocate as managed security service providers and IT service providers is to have a secondary company back up your email itself, okay? There are various vendors who do that. Company like ours or some of my colleagues here on the call, they can help you set up a proper email backup system. So if email were to be lost, that's a secondary problem. I think the primary problem is business email compromise, which was addressed a few minutes ago. But if email were to be lost in someone's entire mailbox, whether it's anywhere from the administrative assistant all the way up to the president of the company, were lost, it could be safely restored into most environments where you can access that information.
And to that point too, and I'm sure most people are not aware of Office 365, there are ways for those mailboxes to be encrypted now with ransomware. So think about, if anybody's like I am, you keep all of your email. If you didn't have access to that tomorrow, how detrimental would that be to your business? It's something most people don't know that it's able to be done, and if you don't have a backup solution for that, that could be very catastrophic to your business.
And to add on to what Paul is saying, I couldn't agree more. And we've all learned through third party or in direct experience with clients or soon to be clients that access to email is really what the bad guys want. Because if you think about it, the keys to the kingdom really flow through your mailbox, right? Assume if you have access, if a bad guy, a threat actor has access to your email, and then they get access to something, or they're inside of your mailbox, but you don't know it, they can go through and reset passwords left and right. And they can do that by having access to your mailbox. So protect that very, very carefully.
Cool. Jim, one of the things that I was just thinking with the backup solution that Brian's talking about, I'm sure that you've had to go to backups for investigations, because if someone deletes stuff out of their mailbox.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. I mean, for us, any internal investigation we do, and it could be anything, right? But any investigation from IP theft to fraud to harassment to what have you, like, let's face it, it's all digital, right? And a piece of information that I'm most relying on is something that somebody wrote, because people's memories aren't terrific, right? So I'm always digging in to email, right? And we work with some providers to help us, e-discovery companies and whatnot, to help us, and usually it's a phone call to the IT, to the IT department, and what we've seen is that it depends on what type of service and licensing they have and how long those emails are available. And so for us, it's a critical piece of information to have. But to your point as well, when we've got these spear phishing attacks, or when folks are surveilling, lying in wait, the intelligence they're gathering and the opportunity they're waiting for is going to be over email, right? And that's really kind of interesting to see that someone may know that a certain transaction is happening, and they know it because they've been watching the email and waiting and lying in wait. So I think we really have to be careful about some of the information that we put in email and how we send email and the access we have to our email. And let's also consider the fact that people working at home, sometimes I can't print from my work email, so I'm going to send something over to my Gmail account. Oh, yep. Boy. I mean, right? You guys have seen this, right? And
yep. Every day.
Is there an office policy about that? Has anybody ever seen one?
I have a good story about that. We had a customer who fired an employee and let them go back to their desk before they told us. They started taking emails and files and just dumping it to their Gmail account and sending it out.
I like those, Chris. Those are easy ones. I love it when people forward forward their email, their corporate email to a Gmail account. It makes my job very easy.
Yeah.
Okay. Or when they take a thumb drive and they stick it in their laptop and put right, and then it's because all those processes and all those functions are searchable, right? And from a forensic standpoint.
Well, it just it illustrates too, though, just like we're talking about a lot of technical controls, or we're talking about putting things in like EDR, web filtering, DNS, stuff like that. But at the end of the day, administrative controls are just as important. So policies and procedures in your business are just as important. So if you don't have the proper policies and procedures down, like firing an employee and letting them go back to a desk and before their accounts are disabled is questionable practice.
Or having in-person or multiple people to verify ACH transaction.
Yeah, or I know this. We kind of want to throw us a little bit with backup, but like even just backup, like Brian talked about air gapping. You can call it immutable backup, whatever. There's a ransomware out there called Deadbolt, and if you use something like a QNAP storage device for Synology, they leverage vulnerabilities in there to destroy that first. So it doesn't matter on site if you have it even encrypted on site, they just try to destroy it. And then once they get it destroyed, then you're sitting there and they'll just go back in. Now they'll go ahead and ransom you. So you got to be careful.
Chris, I have to say that's the issue when we deal with matters that are going to be an employee termination, right? It's like,
Oh, yeah.
I got to talk to the IT director and say, okay, how do we lock them out of the building? How do we lock them out of the system?
Yep.
Right. That's a huge issue because I'm concerned about not just exfiltration of data, right, or theft of client lists or what have you.
Destruction.
Exactly. Destruction, right? And I mean, you guys tell me, is it that hard to do this? To really
Well,
to
No, it's not hard to lock. It's not hard to lock them out, but we get to these clients that have one password. You know, they've got all their online systems. They're using the same password everywhere, and they've been using it forever. Well, Sally, Steve, and Joe all share one account. Well, there's no accountability, and that makes your job even harder because if everyone's logging in with the same username and password, now how do you know who did what?
Well, here's the other problem though. If the threat actor is internal and it's your IT director,
that's another.
Right. I mean, how you guys have come across these?
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, they're committing felonies doing it. They may not know that, but a lot of them end up in jail because they did that. They lock systems out and stuff like that.
So this is actually good. This is actually a good transition into the next one. Ron and Chris. You know, the next action on the list was to run exercises and create emergency plans to be prepared. What are they talking about? What are we going to do?
You know, it's the same thing as the reason why sports teams drill and test and do their stuff and scrimmage and just make their whole life doing what they're doing, right up to first responders, and more in alignment probably with first responders. Anyone who's been on this call who's been through incident, you know it's highly, highly emotionally charged. Mm-hmm. People can't think straight, especially business owners. Their whole world, their whole everything is now, you know, in this balance with so much uncertainty. So if you haven't been through some sort of drill on this, you know, emotional decisions get made and they are not going to be good decisions. So really that's one of the key reasons for running these regularly. What I've found that's come out of this, especially in the last couple of years, and especially with insurance really stepping in with cyber insurance, to really make it clear and manage the expectation of the client for us is to run through these, what we call tabletop exercises. Mm-hmm. And we run through a scenario and we run through, all right, this just happened and nope, we need to access your document. And the first thing is, well, you know, they pull up their computer to get to the document and you're like, no, it's not there. So you start with that. Next thing is, all right, who's the first phone call do we make? Do you have that number? We go through that. And then, you know, we work through that exercise. And the part that they get surprised on is, well, the insurance company's in charge until further notice. Well, aren't you guys going to be doing anything? We can't, because the forensics people have to come in and do their job now before we can pick up and follow through on the rest of this. So by managing that expectation, it's a lot easier to work into a lot of the planning and the other strategies that we come up around this. But it's probably, you know, one of the best things that we've done just to manage the expectation, as well as kind of run through these scenarios and get people prepared when the incident happens.
I'd like to add to what Ron just said, if that's okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
So it begins with, and I agree with everything Ron said, and it really begins with having a proper set of policies and procedures, mm-hmm. right? And so part of that, what's called in our term, our parlance is referred to as a WISP, W-I-S-P, stands for Written Information Security Plan. That is kind of the master plan that effectively guides and then outlays or defines what falls below it. There could be an incident response plan, there could be an internet acceptable use policy, all of these different components that really begin there, and that the policy is really the law, right? It's a law by which the organization has agreed to act and behave. And when things go wrong and an attack and a breach occurs, what are we going to do? And to put a finer point on what Ron just said, we're going to slow down, we're going to consult the manual, we're going to do the things that we said we would do and the things that we practiced we would do, right? It's much like if pilots in a plane are in distress, they're trained to look at the manual. What does this light mean? What does this beeping mean? Let's look it up before we start freaking out, right? And that's a big part of also recovering and being thoughtful and present when there is an attack.
So as far as tabletop exercises, I think the thing that people miss the most is the people in in the business and what they need to do, and also business processes. It sucks when IT goes down, but if you're not running tabletop exercises about how to keep your business running during this, you're missing out. Like in this area, obviously we have a lot of manufacturing, and if they were to lose their entire IT infrastructure, they may still be able to produce. But what happens if you lose power to part of the building? What happens if that machine back there dies? You need a plan for that. And one of the things that we've seen is just businesses just don't have plans for even that. They don't have operational plans. They don't have IT plans. And they need to be part of a bigger solution for the entire company. There needs to be a business continuity plan in place, disaster recovery plan in place for the entire company, not just IT. And I think that's something that a lot of companies miss out on. And then you run through these tabletop exercises. You run through an incident response plan for everything, whether it's IT or OT.
And I'm sure y'all have experienced some of this too, but like it needs to come from the top down. Like it can't be the IT department or the outsourced trying to push this.
If you don't have a seat at the top, you need to see at the table. If you don't have a seat at the table and you're trying to do this, it just gets lost.
So absolutely, and all of us have walked into. I've walked in, sat down with the CFO, CEO, whoever, and said, "Look, by the time we're done, we're going to tell you that the IT director was right. All the things that they were asking for, they need, and because you're right, because it's 100%, and we see this a lot. Work in education, they don't have a seat at the table, so they can't make these business decisions about risk, and then it's hard to quantify how much you should spend, what you should do. But if there's that one person, and the organizations that we've had the most success with, it's usually it's an operational person, COO, CFO. They get it and say, "Hey, Jim, we had this incident." Usually you call because you had an incident, something happened. And then, like you said, we got to go back. Okay, let's start with policies. And that's the other thing I look at when I walk into any investigation. Let me see your acceptable use policies. Like Brian was saying, what are the rules of the road for the employees? Try to terminate somebody on a non-existent policy. Right? We work with lawyers. It's hard. You need these things, not just to have better cyber hygiene, but also for any corrective actions that you need to take and for incident response planning. It's so critical, but most businesses don't do it until there's a problem.
I'm going to jump off the actual list of questions right now because I just got one that I think we need to address is who's responsible for cybersecurity?
Everyone. Everyone. It doesn't matter what your job is. It doesn't matter who you are. You're responsible. And security does not be. You cannot subvert security by being the CEO or the president. Well, Stop thinking that way.
I'll add to that and say it really begins at the top. My opinion is begins at the top because it really what you have to instill in an organization is a culture of cybersecurity. So it really begins there. It then involves education, training, using proper tools, and learning what's going on. Just saying everyone's responsible, that's great, okay, but how can they know what to do? But having a culture of cybersecurity, in my case, because part of what we do is we help government contractors with, for example, NIST or CMMC compliance. That's something that's really preached very heavily. Culture of cybersecurity, but you have to give them the tools so they're aware and know what to do.
And Bob, that's something else with having that top-down approach. Like I think Chris just said, sometimes it's like, okay, it's inconvenient, so people don't want to do it. Or, that's, my staff can do that, but I want to bypass multi-factor, or I want to do, and making sure that stuff doesn't happen. And I'm actually seeing, I don't know if y'all have seen this yet on any insurance applications, but I did one, and it's actually asking who in your organization is responsible for cybersecurity. I'm seeing that on the insurance applications now.
And some of them will give you an option too that it's an external company.
Correct.
Which I don't love because we're not responsible and we're not accountable inside that company.
This was actually both. It asked who was the outsourced, but then who internally.
Yeah, I've seen it the other way too.
For the policies.
So Paul, you said, people want to circumvent it because it's inconvenient. That financial services firm I was talking about, that was a $200,000 loss of someone's retirement money because someone didn't take 3 seconds to click on for multi-factor.
Well,
So,
and let's be honest, if I'm going after a company and I'm a threat actor, and a lot of people don't know what whaling is, but whaling is basically a version of spearfishing that goes after executives and companies. You're the easy. If I can get you, guess what? If I send email as you to anybody else in that company,
They're going to read it.
they're gonna read it and they're gonna listen to it because they're afraid of the and it depends on your management style too. If you're what kind of manager you are, but like if you scare people, if you instill fear in people, you think that they're going to make the right decision when they get an email from you? No.
so and that's a really good point, Chris, because we actually did an part of our assessment process when we're working with a new prospect is we will send out a fake phishing email. We'll send out a phishing email to the client. It took me 4.5 minutes last week to get the password of the executive at the law firm that I was working with. So I sent an email out. He clicked on it, gave me his password.
This is one of the things that we've been doing. We've been working with high-net individuals and C-suite executives in trying to claw back all the information that's on about them that's on the internet, that's available, right, beyond the Google search with the Spokios and the Verdarises and all that information that's been aggregated and for sale and makes them a real target. And to your point, Chris, it's that email at 5 o'clock on a Friday before the end of the holiday that says you need to do X, right? That's the killer. And it's just people want to click and get out of the office, and I get it.
That's
you mentioned
exactly
it earlier
how
too.
a
You mentioned it
customer,
too. I was gonna say.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, Jim. You mentioned it earlier when you're doing deals inside of a company. Let's say you're gonna buy somebody or you're trying to do like a large deal. The CEO, the CFO, they're all gonna have access to that. So they're going to know. So where's the best information comes from the top.
Absolutely.
Sorry.
Okay. Well, I allowed us to get sidetracked off the list. Let me jump back into the list here. Brian, one of the things that was on the list, it says encrypt your data so it cannot be used or stolen. Is that I hear stuff getting encrypted all the time with BitLocker and things like, not BitLocker, but ransomware. Is that the same thing?
Technically, it is the same thing, actually. But from a business operations perspective, it depends on who controls the keys, who holds the keys. And that is quite literally the term that's used in the background. So let's start off with the term used initially, which was BitLocker. I know you said that in error, but I'll kind of talk about that for a second. So it is important that data for any organization should be encrypted on any device, especially if the device is mobile. If that device leaves your office, like a laptop or a tablet or a smartphone, for example, has any corporate data on it, that device should always be encrypted. And what that means is it is locked up. That data cannot be viewed or extracted unless you have a specific password or code or numerical sequence to get into that device. And if that data is encrypted, if you were to remove the hard drive from that computer, let's say the hard drive from the laptop, just as an example, that data is scrambled. It cannot be viewed. It's government military grade encryption. Yeah, the NSA probably has a backdoor, but we're not going to talk about that today. But that being said, and I was just kidding about that, they probably don't. But my point is, however, that data, that's BitLocker. That's something that any administrator or outsourced IT company can take care of. But now let's go a little bit further and say, all right, how does that compare to how if I get ransomware, so your data is encrypted, like a crypto variant is what it's called. If that information is not encrypted and you can't read it, it's kind of the same idea. They just hold the bad guys hold the key and they say, hey, you want your information back, you got to pay me to unlock that stuff, buddy, right? That's how it works. So that's how they hold your feet to the fire without getting down the rabbit hole as far as what will transpire now, what the executive leadership, what the breach coach, or what the lawyer and the insurance company, all those people involved advise you to do is another conversation. However, the idea is similar. But I want to speak to this specifically about if you have sensitive data, any data that's considered non-public information, NPI, or personally identifiable information, or maybe other information that's protected by state or federal regulation in regulated industries, especially, most organizations, whether they know it or not, hold sensitive information. And if that data is breached or what's called exfiltrated and it leaves the organization, those people whose data was taken must be notified. So I'll wrap up really quickly and say this. If you have critical data, that data should be in what's called a least privilege access state. So it should only be accessible to those who should actually have access to it. So that limits the exposure of who has access to it. Okay. Further, that data should be put into what's called, if it's very sensitive, especially financial information or social security numbers, credit cards, banks, should be put into what's called safe harbor, where you can put in your own additional file-based encryption on those files. So I know that was a bit of a long monologue, but hopefully that explains how those things differ and how they relate to each other.
Hey, Brian, can I ask a follow-up question to that? So one of the misconceptions that I think a lot of customers that I deal with, oh, I don't store credit card information. So they think that's not PII. Can you speak to that?
Sure. Yeah. Anybody who takes credit cards falls under a type of compliance called PCI DSS, Payment Card Industry Data Security Standards. And any credit card information that's held is, now I'm assuming, Paul, your question is, if you hold credit card information, is that considered privilege? Is that your question?
I'm saying the argument was, well, I don't have PII. I don't keep credit cards. The name, address, phone number, email address, but I
hear what you're saying. Yeah, thank you. And so there's a misconception, what we call a false belief, that people think I don't have credit card information or bank information, therefore any of the information I have is not critical or sensitive or should be guarded. That's not true. Anything that can personally identify a person, that's why it's called personally identifiable information, or PII, must be safeguarded, and nearly every state in the union has breach notification laws. If that information were to be taken out of your organization, all those people whose information was taken must be notified.
Actually, here in New Jersey, an email address and a name is considered PII when it's together. So every computer that we've ever seen has stuff on it.
Well, that's every state too. Every state has different laws, so you have to look at the laws in your state to determine like what is actually PII.
Yeah, it's pretty. We've done a number of these, right? And we work with attorneys. It's pretty similar across every state, like you're saying. But here's the other thing too. Even if it's tech, first of all, as you guys have probably been involved with, like, when is a data breach a data breach? How far do you have to dig in to figure it out? So companies sometimes say, I can't spend all that money to do this. I'm gonna report it. Or, this is the issue, right? Is it, like Brian was saying, has it left? Is it exfiltrated or not? What type of data is it? And I've gone through the exercise with companies with this. It's so difficult sometimes to figure out. It may be PII here, but in the European Union, it's not, and vice versa. This is where it gets really messy. So I think all these proactive things you're doing, the incident response thing that Ron was talking about, man, that is so important to know who to call when this stuff happens, because it's so tricky.
And to add on to what Jim just said, I agree with what you said. It goes back to the old adage, we learned this as children, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Absolutely. So if you can lock the wrong people out of the access to information, again, you're limiting what's called the attack surface. So only a certain amount of people, if they are compromised or tricked through a phishing campaign, for example, those people may not have access to sensitive data that the hackers or the threat actors are after. So that's an important part of the calculus. I mean, this is a days-long conversation we can have here on this topic. So to be very clear, you can't just overly simplify it. But
and I think that's what we're going to do, is we're going to have to expand these topics for a future event. Jim, you brought up a real good thing about business owners not understanding or understanding what a breach really is. In fact, even IT owners. I was on a call the other day, and the guy pulled me aside and asked me, and goes, I'm filling out an insurance application, and it says, has your business ever been part of a breach? And he goes, well, last week we lost access to one of our email accounts for about 45 minutes because we could see that somebody from someplace else was on the account. So technically, that's a breach.
I tell clients, here's the thing. Don't say breach yet. Okay.
The account was compromised. Okay, the email account was compromised.
As everybody on this panel would say, it's an incident.
It's a security incident. Yeah.
Breach is a lawyer term to me. That's a law term.
It triggers so many other. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't do due diligence, but don't say breach just yet, especially to your secretary or an email to everybody. Please you have time to investigate this, right? And determine what happens. And if you can. But yeah, I think this is the issue. And what about third-party vendors? How many times have you guys been contacted by one of your clients who said, I got an email from a third-party vendor that said that they've been compromised? Right? And then what?
I got a letter in the mail from a college I went to 15 years ago that said they lost my social security number because it was on some laptop in somebody's car. And I'm like, why is my social security number on a laptop 15 years later in somebody's car?
Because nobody wants to delete their information. This is
apparently not.
This is the real issue, right? Can we lower the threat vector, the attack surface, by deleting information?
Have a policy. Anyway, Jim, one of the other topics in there was educate employees on common taxes. I think you touched a little bit of that already.
Yeah. I think the issue is here that we all got to think before we click. But I think it's a dance between technology solutions, good cyber practices and policies, as well as the weakest link, which is your users, right? 60, 80, 90% of all data breaches or incidents have been caused by somebody clicking on a link. And here's the problem that I see: it's just not email, it's phone calls, it's instant messaging, it's text messaging. There's so many different ways that people can be compromised, right? So how do we teach them to operate on different devices, different platforms, various applications? But I think it comes down to a lot of what is being said here. Education is important. We need to be able to give people, policies, education, but also we have to integrate technology into those solutions. And so that there are ways that it's not a single. We don't want a person to be a single point of failure. But honestly, that for me, working with a lot of businesses, you need to stop and think before you click. And here's the crazy thing that I tell people to do: if you're not sure, pick up the phone. Remember those things we used to talk on them to people? Pick up the phone and say, "Hey, boss, this is kind of weird. What do you want me to do?"
And call the number that you know, not the number that might be the email that may have been changed.
Yep.
Right. Or if I get a link, from that says Chase, guess what? I'm gonna go and actually go to the real URL, to one that I know. Right? I mean, anything embedded in an email that has a hyperlink should already raise your antenna. But there are certain things that you guys do, like emails coming from external resources, right? Service sources. There's a banner, right? I think that's helpful. That's a piece.
Well, and let's stop shaming people. Let's encourage people, if they make a mistake and they realize it, to report it immediately. Because the quicker they report it, the quicker we can respond to it. Don't shame people. Don't threaten to fire somebody because they make a mistake. We all do it. We've all clicked on something and then 2 seconds later realize that we probably shouldn't have clicked on it. Just don't shame people. Let's encourage people and stop the fear mongering of, like, if you click on this, you're going to be gone.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Chris, because when we're working with prospects now and we actually do that phishing email, we're not calling out the person that clicked on it because they made a mistake. Right. We're calling out because they're human and people do make mistakes, and people need to know that they actually know it's better. And the very last point that was in the list from the White House this week, Jim, was work with law enforcement to establish relationships in advance. A lot of business owners are scared. You want to call the FBI or the Secret Service to know about us?
Well, since I was with the Secret Service, I'd say call the Secret Service first.
Okay.
But I would say, look, here's the thing: the Secret Service and the FBI both have public-private partnerships, right? How many times have we heard this? But it's really important. Between the Cyber Fraud Task Force with the Secret Service, InfraGard with the FBI, go to those meetings, show up. Meet your colleagues, start getting information. New Jersey, we have New Jersey NJ Kick. Great information, right? You have to establish these relationships so when something bad calls up, you can pick up the phone and call somebody and have a relationship. Just, again, it should be part of an incident response plan, but can IT directors do that in small businesses? Maybe not. I think that all the folks here on this panel probably have a lot of clients, and they can be that conduit if necessary. But I think you need to have a relationship in place, because if something's really bad and you need help with it, you have to figure out what law enforcement's job is, but there's also a lot of resources that CIS is putting out now that folks should look at, best practices. Not too much information, but you should be able to pick through it. But those relationships are important. So when something goes wrong or you have a question, you have a resource.
Well, I don't think we should forget state police either, because state police works directly with the FBI. So if you have a breach, you can absolutely reach out to your state police first. And if it extends past the state that you're in, they will then loop the FBI in. I don't think we need to be afraid of this. And by the way, don't hide behind the facade that just because like something you got a bunch of stuff stolen that nobody knows about it. They're monitoring the dark web. They're seeing these transactions. They're probably following the Bitcoin wallets that are tracking when you pay a ransom. So if you think that nobody's going to find out, it's probably going to be published someplace eventually.
I have to tell you that most of the times, the reason I decided to get into this after the Secret Service, because I can't tell you how many times I got a call from a field office in another state that tell us to send somebody out to a car dealership in Parsippany, New Jersey or someplace because they knew they'd been compromised.
Yep.
Right? I mean, to your point.
Yeah, they know.
I mean,
and it may not be public knowledge, but it's known. So let's not,
hide.
Yeah, and there's a law that is in the Senate. It's waiting for the House for critical infrastructure. But eventually it's going to be a law where you're going to have to report this in a certain amount of time. And if you don't, there's going to be penalties for it.
Cool.
So,
well, we are at the bottom of the hour. I would like to thank everybody for coming. And before we do that, before we leave, why don't you tell me, why don't we go around the room one more time, tell people how they can get in touch with you if they want to get more information from you or to get in touch, starting with Ron.
All right. So probably the best way to get in touch with me, Facebook, LinkedIn, I'm sure we're going to be seen on there, or my email address, which is just rtrado@tccube.com. Just reach out. I'm happy to help out anyone.
Cool. Paul?
Yeah, I mean, I would say if you're watching this on LinkedIn or Facebook, drop your comment below. We'll definitely connect and respond with you. Vitalintegrators.com is our website, and you can email me at paul@vitalintegrators.com.
Pretty simple. Porzio or Porzio Compliance Services, PORZIO. I think there's not many of them, so that's a good place to start.
Brian?
Sure. So if anyone would like to reach us, exceeditmd.com is the easiest way to get a hold of us. And like I said before, we help any business, but we focus on government contractors who have compliance needs.
Go to techygurus.com. You can fill out a form there if you want to contact us. Don't email me. I'd give you my email address, but I'd probably miss it. If you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, I love it. I'll connect on LinkedIn. We can talk on there and go from there.
Cool. And I'm Bob Mitch from Metro MSP. We help businesses manage and mitigate cyber risk. And with that, I'll drop the link one more time for the tip sheet. Go ahead and download it. And if you've got any problems, got any issues, if you just want to talk and find out if you really have your risk covered, give us a call and we'll figure it out. Have a great day, guys.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Great panel.